Hey y'all, and welcome back to a new video. Today we're just going to be looking at a chess game that I played recently, which ended up being one of the highest accuracy games I've ever gotten in the Dragon. At an accuracy of 97.2%, I played one inaccurate move, and everything else was like almost the top engine line. It was very, very interesting. Also, before we begin, I did want to say that I haven't been uploading in a while. That is because I have been lazy, and probably I'm going to be uploading more in the future. Anyway, let's get into the game. So my opponent starts off the game with pawn to e4, the most sensible approach, pawn to c5, knight f3, and pawn to d6. The point of this move is that if I would play the move knight f6 immediately, he can push forward with this pawn, and now when I play this move, he's unable to do so as I would be taking it. So my opponent goes d4, immediately striking at the center. C takes d4, knight takes d4, and knight to f6. This is also a very, very important move order difference, because if I were to play the move, which I obviously want to play since this is a dragon opening, I want to play the move pawn to g6. If I play this move pawn to g6, my opponent has the extra added option of going pawn to c4 in these positions, which, as the computer doesn't think is the top engine move, is a very, very reasonable one, as what it does is it takes a very nice clamp of this d5 square, makes it difficult for black to eventually go with e6 and d5, as black likes to do in some of these structures, and now we enter not really a dragon, more of a Moroxi bind formation, not what I want to go for. So instead, we play knight to f6 first, forcing my opponent to defend the pawn somehow, either with knight to c3 or pawn to f3. After pawn to f3, there's a whole can of worms after e5, knight b3, d5, but we're not going to get into that. Instead, the main line is simply to go knight to c3. And now we enter the classical dragon formation after g6, bishop to e3, and bishop to g7. One thing that you should know about these positions in the dragon is that the engine is very wrong. The engine has no idea what it's talking about. Yes, if I played an engine in these positions, I would lose 100 games out of 100. But for a human, the dragon opening is very, very interesting, very, very like in depth, without hundreds of moves of theory, without like 20 moves of theory, 25 moves of theory. Your average person isn't really going to be able to figure out these positions. Is actually going to be under a decent bit of pressure, which is why I really enjoy the opening so much, because it just gets into some combative stuff, which most openings don't really do. So after bishop g7, my opponent has to play this move pawn to f3, which is very, very interesting. The point is that in these positions, black likes to go with his move knight to g5 and try to go after the bishop. If my opponent were to play the move queen to d2, not knight to g5, knight to g4, and basically my opponent probably has to give up the bishop pair in some way, or you can go bishop to g5 and then we have a game, but this isn't what white likes to do, as you're kind of weakening the center, and I can immediately go after you with knight to c6. So this is why white likes to play the move pawn to f3, strengthening the center and defending the pawn on the square on g4. I decide to castle. This is all theory. Obviously, as you can see, the times aren't really going down. We know what we're doing here. Queen d2, knight to c6, putting some pressure in the center, and long castles. And this is the critical moment of the game. This is the critical point in the theory, and this is around the time when most people don't really know what they're doing in the theory. Normally you know one or two extra moves after this point, but this is kind of where you're out of theory, and I actually only have theory for one more move. I think my opponent actually out-prepped me in this position, which is kind of interesting, but alright, we'll look at it. I play the move pawn to d5, which, if you understand chess, you might notice that this loses a pawn. Knight takes c6 here, 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 and knight takes d5. And this is a free pawn for white. However, this isn't really what you want to do in these positions, because here it's a lot of theory, and black is normally completely fine with going on attack on the king side. For example, knight takes d5, queen takes d5. You don't trade queens here, even though it is a fork on your queen and your rook. You have to play this move queen to c7, and this is kind of how you're supposed to play these positions. And after queen here, your opponent is already in a lot of deep trouble after bishop to f5, opening up an attack on the queen while also threatening a checkmate. You would have to give up your queen and play this position for a while, which is easier said than done. This position is very, very difficult to play. Very, very difficult to play for white. For black, it's almost like easy, even though white is technically up 2 pawns, because this rook is just awful and needs a couple moves to get into the game, while black's bishops target white's white's queen side very, very easily with open b file and open c file to go after it this way. So my opponent decided not to go into these lines. I'm sure he knew that in these lines black gets a slight advantage. He decided to go with a very, very interesting line, which I've seen a lot recently. And this line is a little bit difficult to play against, and actually I didn't have theory in it for this game. My opponent plays the move queen to e1. Of course, I looked at this after the game and was able to figure out all the moves. But here I'm on my own, and I have to figure out what I want to do on move 10 of this game. Also, it should be noted that in these positions, in these dragon positions, they normally hinge off of 1 or 2 moves. If I make an inaccurate move, it's normally just completely lost. So I have to be very, very accurate. So I think for a little bit, and I find the move pawn to e5 after 6 seconds of thought, because I kind of know some ideas in this position, and normally you want to go with some ideas in the center. Pawn to e5 makes a lot of sense, disallowing pawn to e5 for my opponent, putting pressure in the center, and forcing my opponent to take on c6. Takes. And my opponent decides to play the move e takes d5, c takes d5, and also c takes d5 is an inaccuracy, by the way. It shows that I don't really know the position. Knight takes d5 is the move I have to play because of my opponent's next move. Because after c takes d5, bishop to g5, actually black is in a lot of trouble here, and I realized this, and I started worrying because it looks like I'm just going to lose my central pawns. Obviously, there is an attack on this pawn with the queen. This bishop is pinning to this queen, so this knight isn't really defending this pawn, which means that this pawn is also under attack. There's no way for me to defend both. If I play this move, I'm not even threatening the knight, because after it takes, it opens up an attack on my queen, and that's just a problem. And this position already looks like I'm doing quite badly, and that's what I thought during the game. However, I keep making very accurate moves, and the position is only plus 0.5, which is a normal dragon position. Like, I've been playing near top engine lines for like the entire game. I have made one slight move difference, which is the c takes d5, but currently I'm playing the top engine moves. So I think for a little bit, and I decided to play this move bishop to e6. And the point is, I'm giving up this pawn here for a couple of reasons. I'm giving up this pawn here, first of all, because I can't really defend it that well. Second of all, I'm giving up this pawn because I need to develop my bishop here. And also, after this move, there's also some like tempo winning moves here. Like there's like some tactics here that allows white to just lose the game on the spot, like h6, bishop h4, g5 here. Not g5, sorry. What is the move here? Oh, just rook b8, just relax. Okay. I mean, I didn't calculate this. I just thought that I might have like h6, g5, and like have some idea with like knight g4, and like maybe get into position somehow. But I guess the computer doesn't really like that. In any case, my opponent thinks for a little bit and plays a very, very accurate move. Actually, the only move in the position that doesn't give up minus 1.5 advantage for black. He plays the move bishop to c4, which is a very, very nice move. This move does two things. First of all, it attacks the pawn. Right? Very, very simple. Attacks the pawn. But the second thing it does is it allows this rook to enter the game much more easily. Because this rook is normally the problem piece in these dragons. If white can't establish an attack on the king side fast enough, this rook kind of gets left behind, and it becomes an issue. And normally white takes a couple moves to bring it over here. So I had to think for a while because this is a very, very difficult position. I obviously can't take the bishop because of this. So how do I play this position? And I thought for a little bit on how I'm supposed to do this. And I ended up coming up with this interesting idea, queen to b6, which the low engine gives it as the top engine move. Technically, the engine at depth 24, I think. Yeah, engine at depth 24 gives d4. But both moves are pretty similar. Queen b6, I think, is a very, very nice move because it has a couple of ideas. The first one is that it attacks the bishop. It attacks the bishop now because the queen is not in the move here. If my opponent were to take this pawn with the knight, for example, let's say with the knight, then I was thinking about just take, rook takes, And then I get some attack. Like I get this move. I get d5. I get pressure here. The bishop opens up. My queen opens up. Let's just show that on the board. Knight takes d5. Knight takes d5. Bishop takes d5. Rook d5. And I thought this move e4. And I thought that I was already doing really, really well. And the computer agrees with me. Actually, what's really interesting, the computer says e4 now. And then, actually, I have an even better attack. After bishop to b3, this bishop becomes a liability. I don't even have to do anything with this pawn because I have such a strong initiative after rook fc8 and like a5, a4 mumbo jumbo, and my opponent is almost lost. My opponent's almost lost. It's -2. It's -2, which is just crazy, even though I'm technically down a pawn. So I think my opponent realized that. My opponent realized that and played the top engine move, the only move in the position again to not lose the game on the spot. He plays bishop takes f6. This move is a little bit more simple, I think. Bishop takes f6. I think that my move makes a lot of sense here. I think about taking this, but I don't like it as much because I feel like this bishop is a lot stronger than the bishop here, so I decided to recapture on f6. My opponent takes on d5, saying that I can't recapture because the knight takes. It would be a fork of the queen and the bishop, and after I lose my bishop pair, I just have I'm just down a pawn, so I would be losing. So instead I have to play accurately. I have to play aggressively. So the first thing I do is I play this move rook a to b8, which I think is a very accurate move. And the point is that I move my rook out of danger, first of all, but now I threaten some attack over here. I threaten actually almost a check. I threaten a checkmate. Yeah, I do threaten checkmate. Do I threaten checkmate? Well, I threaten a lot of stuff. I threaten like this knight. I threaten a lot of stuff. Like for example, if my opponent were to like take this bishop, bishop g5, here, rook d2, queen b2 here. I mean, what are we calculating right now? Come on. White is lost. What are we doing? So I thought that was pretty good for me. And so I realized that my opponent's really only move was to play either bishop to b3 or pawn to b3 immediately. Technically, there's also knight a4, but I didn't really calculate that. Pawn to b3 I thought made some sense. I don't know what I would have played. Probably would have played some a4, a5 stuff. Try to break open the the king side anyway. Maybe I would go here, trying to get in like this. I don't know. But my opponent played the move bishop to b3, which is the top edge of line, and it gives white a +1 advantage. B3 gives a +0.4 advantage, is what the computer is saying. So bishop to b3, I think for a little bit. And I played the only move this game which isn't blessed by the engine. I played rook f to c8 after a decent bit of thought. This move increases my opponent's advantage by +0.6. Computer gives it as a mistake. I'd say it's more of an inaccuracy, if I'm being honest. But yeah, the point of this move is pretty self-explanatory. I'm bringing a rook toward the center. Computer really liked this move a5 immediately. There was a computer when I was analyzing this game first that said that a5 was already equalizing for black. This one thinks otherwise, obviously, but whatever. Rook f to c8, and it seems like black's attack is very, very strong, right? You got every single piece on the board is staring down on my opponent's king, while my opponent has two defenders. These pieces don't count. These pieces are doing nothing. This queen maybe counts, but still, this means that black has 2 more attackers than they have defenders, and black is probably going to have a very, very strong attack in the near future. The only move now, which I looked at and I thought that I was completely fine with this move, is the move knight to d5. And I was calculating this move. For a while, but I just thought that I was going to be okay because after rook takes d5, I don't know. I just thought I was better. I just thought I was just genuinely better. I think this is. Let me look at it. No. This is this move knight to d5 is the top engine move. And I just thought I was better, but this is the only move that gives white an advantage. This gives white a +1.5 advantage, which is like a nearly winning advantage, which is crazy to me. Crazy that like the computer just laughs in the face of this huge attack coming down at white's king, and I don't even know. Like as a human, I'd be terrified. As a human, like personally, I'd be so scared of this attack. I'd try to prevent it in every way, shape, and form, but I guess that's why like humans aren't engines. Anyways, my opponent didn't play that move. Instead, played another move, which loses every bit of advantage for white. He plays the move king to b1. And this finally allows black to equalize the game. And now the attack keeps going. Pawn to a5. Pretty self-explanatory move. I want to go forward. I want to go forward like this. My opponent's knight probably has to come to a4 to stop the pawn. This was the only thing I was calculating. The only move I was calculating was knight a4. I just thought everything else was bad. And I'm right. Knight a4 is the only move. Knight e4 also works technically, but it's much worse than knight a4. Knight a4 probably has to be played. My opponent doesn't play knight a4. My opponent plays the move knight e4, which, as I said, is okay. But it feels like it's going away from the attack. The point of knight a4 right now is to stop the advancement of the a-pawn, obviously. And my threat here is to play rook takes c4. Queen takes c4, like here. Like there's like some lines here. My opponent probably takes the bishop. I don't even know. Like it gets really dicey. Like maybe I push here first and then I take the knight. And then there's like some problems and my opponent's bishop is pinned to the king. And then I win the piece and I try to win the game. But in any case, my opponent doesn't go for that. My opponent doesn't go for this knight a4 line, which just stops all my counterplay, is what I thought. I just thought, okay, well, probably the position has equalized, but okay, knight a4, I don't really see where the attack is going. Probably I'd figure it out. Whatever, let's keep going in the game. Knight to e4. I think for a while on this move, and I find a very, very nice idea. Bishop to e7, which is also the only move for black. This is the only move. Everything else is plus like 2. Everything else is plus 2. Because if I go bishop to g7, which is the very, very logical move, bishop to g7, then my opponent immediately enters with this move, rook to e6, which I saw during the game. And then white doesn't really have an attack. Black doesn't really have an attack because this bishop is probably going to be traded in some lines. Like probably I go queen c7. Yeah, my opponent sacks the rook. Yeah, of course. Rook takes here, 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 and takes this. And now at the end of this line, I'm down 2 pawns, and I'm going to lose the game. I didn't calculate that far. I just thought rook to d6 was a bit of counterplay that I shouldn't allow, and so I decided not to allow it, and instead play this move bishop to e7, which I think makes a lot of sense. It still is on a diagonal that's close to the king. It's canceling all of these knight moves, and it's stopping rook d6. What could be a more natural move, right? My opponent here thinks for a while, he has to play knight back to c3. This is the only move in the position. He has to play knight back to c3. He has to realize that he made a mistake and go back to this knight a4 idea. However, my opponent doesn't want to do that. My opponent doesn't want to do this move. And loses the game pretty much immediately with this move, queen to f2. And this move is game over. It's game over immediately. Like, I see his idea. I see his idea with this move, queen f2. First of all, he's trying to trade the queens. If I trade the queens, I lose. It's just game over. Yeah, plus 4. So I don't trade the queens. The reason why if I trade the queens I lose is because then I have no attack. I have no attack without the queen. So really my move is very, very simple. I have to play the move queen to b7. I could also play this move queen to b5, but I thought that this didn't make any sense. Like, why am I allowing a4 to come with tempo? Why am I allowing knight c3 to come with tempo? I don't want any of these things to come with tempo. Let's get out of the way with this move queen to b7, which is also the only move in the position that wins. And now I thought that my opponent was just about to lose, because my opponent has nothing here. I'm about to pick up a pawn near his king, and even though material is equal, I think, by the way, my opponent's, I think his top option is either a4 or pawn to c3, and the computer agrees with me. Pawn to c3 and a4 are the only ways to go with. My opponent plays a different move, which we'll get to later. I don't like the move that my opponent played at all. If he plays the move pawn to a4, I was thinking I was just going to simply take. This pawn is weak. This pawn is going to sneak through. His king is still very weak. It's a problem. Bishop a6, bishop a3 is coming. It's a difficult position. Sure, my opponent's losing, obviously. If my opponent's king moves, I immediately get rook f2, rook c2. My opponent probably has to give up their queen. It's bad. It's really, really bad. But this is what he has to do. Also, I think probably c3 is better. Yeah, c3 here, here, here. Now my opponent can already, like, maybe come here with queen c2. Yeah, like queen c2. And try to survive in some way. And I still have to play accurately here. Like, the game's not over, but it is significantly better for black. Instead, after queen f2, queen b7, my opponent decides to go with a different line, which he calculated. I'm sure that my opponent calculated. It'd be like crazy if he missed this. He played the move knight to c3. Now realizing it was a mistake, and he spent 1.5 minutes on this move, so he obviously saw my response. But I don't understand why he would go with this if he saw what I was going to do, because rook c3, bc3 is very, very natural, followed by a4. Already in the dragon, if you know anything about the dragon, the sacrifice on c3 is very, very common after long castles. Even after not long castles, the sacrifice on c3 is extraordinarily common. So I might want to do this anyway, but if I do this, now I get 2 pieces for the rook. So it's like a win-win. It's a win-win. I want to sack the rook, and I also get 2 pieces. Like what? Sure. So I don't understand this move at all. I don't understand why he didn't play c3 or a4. Feels like it would keep the game going longer. But alas, here we are. And still in these positions, my opponent finds a way to fight back, because here he actually is up in material at the end of the day. He plays the move king a1, which makes a lot of sense. He's just getting his king out of the way, trying to bring the rook. He's threatening to take, not right now because of queen to b2 checkmate, but he wants to go here and have some lines and maybe be able to survive in some way. But of course I take on b3, and he takes back with the c-pawn, and he's saying that, okay, his king is safe. He wants to keep going. He's going to play rook to b1, queen c2, bring the rook here. Yes, I have the bishop pair, so black is probably better, but it's still going to be a game, and that's all my opponent wants at this point. However, as you can see by the evaluation, that it's not going to be a game for much longer, because I don't miss my chances here, and I calculate a very, very interesting line, and I'm very, very proud of this line, actually. I calculate this move, bishop takes b3. I'm very happy with this line, bishop takes b3. It's the top engine move. I play it on the board. The point is, the reason why I had so long to calculate this is because I thought my opponent's idea after bishop takes b3 was to play the move rook to b1, pinning the bishop to my queen, and going with something like this. And I found this really interesting move. after this rook b1 idea. I realized that there was this cool move, queen to a8, which defends the bishop by pinning the pawn to the king. It defends the rook by coming like this, so this bishop will move at some point. And also what it does, the reason why I put the queen there, not the rook there, also queen a6 is bad because the rook is undefended. After bishop takes b3, rook b1, queen a6 is bad because the rook is undefended. If I would start with rook a8 instead, which is the much more logical move, much more reasonable move, I thought that this move was a little bit worse, because the idea was that after queen a8, rook b1, and bishop takes b3, after bishop takes b3, rook b1, queen a8, my opponent has this interesting move, queen to b2, which I had to calculate, I had to be sure of. And if my rook was there, I wouldn't be able to play the move bishop to a3, because he would simply take my bishop, queen takes, rook takes, and I'd lose a piece. But with the queen in8, now he can't take, because of course the rook defends instead of the queen. Just to visualize that for you, if this happened on the board, bishop takes b3, rook b1, queen a8, top engine move, queen to b2, I have this nice move, bishop to a3. And I calculated all this, and now I can't take because of takes and takes, and of course black is going to be winning this position. And if I play the move rook a8, which the computer also likes, after queen here, now I no longer can play the move bishop to a3 because of queen takes b3, and now the rook is no longer defending the bishop. But instead, my opponent decided to go with something different. My opponent went with the move a takes b3. As you can see now, it's mate in 7. And seeing as this game has a 97.3% accuracy, I found the mate in 7. A takes b3 is a very interesting move. I didn't calculate this move. I just thought, okay, a takes b3, if I can't win there, I can't win at all. I will lose. I don't care. So a takes b3. Obviously, I play queen takes b3. I don't even spend a second on this move. I think I probably pre-moved it. My opponent found this very, very interesting move, rook to d2, which I wasn't really looking at. I was looking at this move, rook b1. Of course, this loses because here queen a2. I was looking at some lines with like queen a2 here, but now here queen b2 takes. So actually, rook d2 is the only way to play. Is the only way to keep anything on the board, keep anything going. And here I had to find another very, very interesting line. And this is also something I'm really happy with, because this is like the way to win. This is the way to win. There's no other way for me to just destroy him here. It's just this. It's just this. Queen takes c3. Pretty obvious move. I spent a minute on this move because I'm calculating the line, and I found the right option. Queen takes c3. Obviously, my opponent has to play rook takes b2. Otherwise, he's going to get mated. If he brings the king up like this, this is checkmate, or this is checkmate, since the bishop defends. So my opponent can't do that. And after rook to b2, it looks like my opponent might be running out of the way. It might be going like king b1, rook c1, a couple more moves. My opponent gets out of the woods here. But I found this so nice option. Bishop to a3, which is the move I was already going to play. At least I'm going to be able to win back the rook. But I was like, I have a lot more here. I knew I had a lot more here. This is what I calculated like earlier, and I thought, okay, well, I'm sure I have more here. I'm sure I have more here. At the very least, we're just going to trade all the pieces, and I'm going to have a pawn up in an endgame. Maybe it'll be a pawn up in a queen endgame. I don't really know. I don't really want to calculate all that too. Like, a pawn up in a king endgame can be a draw, so I just didn't want to go for that. Probably it's winning in this case, but again, the less energy used, the better normally. So I decided I didn't want to even calculate all that, and I tried to find the knockout punch, and I did, because I realized that after bishop to a3, my opponent has to play the move rook to b1, and I find another really nice move. You can find it here. You can pause here if you want. It's not the hardest thing. Really, the calculation should start in this position, which is a little bit more difficult. But here, there's one move that's mate in 3. The other moves also are winning, of course, but let's be okay. Bishop takes b7 is not it. Bishop takes b2 is not it. The move here that wins. The move here that wins is this really nice move, rook to a8. And my opponent simply resigns because there's nothing he can do. This is my next move. That's checkmate in 1 because of the double attack. Or if my opponent tries to block it with a rook to d1, it doesn't matter because of the double attack here. Check, check, king to b1, and rook to a1 mate. My opponent gets mated like this. And this is really cool. And I found this idea of rook a8 all the way back here when I took the pawn on c3. And yeah, I mean, this game was kind of crazy. I played at 97.2% accuracy. Again, I had one bad move, which was rook f to c8. I really don't think this move is bad, by the way. It just seems like a very standard move. It seems like a move that anyone would play, really. And I had an estimated elo of 2,700, with the middle game accuracy being 96.1 and the opening accuracy being 100, with two brilliant moves. Of course, the rook sacrifice, and then later the bishop sacrifice on b3. Either way, that's all I've got for you today. Hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you guys found this entertaining, instructive, all of the above. If you did, remember to like, subscribe, do all the normal things YouTubers tell you to do. And yeah, that's it. Good evening and good night.